It's not a matter of knowing I can run further. It's just this question that remains of how far can I run?
Today I'm joined by incredible ultramarathon runner and filmmaker Jeff Pelletier. He's raced some of the toughest events in the world, like the Badwater 135 through Death Valley and the Moab 240 mile race where he finished second overall. In this episode you'll hear what it actually takes to keep going when your body and mind just want to quit, and the lessons Jeff has learned that go way beyond running. So Jeff, I want to start with this. I remember when I first heard about ultramarathon running and that people were actually running 100 miles, and I thought that how can that even be possible? Me at that time I struggled with keeping injury free, just running really little volume, and I couldn't really understand how people could run 100 miles. And now when I've gotten to a place where I run some 100k plus races and have experienced that, I can sort of understand how people can get to a place to run 100 mile races. But you're running 200 mile races and further than that as well, and that I still really can't believe how you get yourself to a point where you can even survive those kind of races. So I want to dive into that, but let's just start with how your journey into running started in the first place.
Well, I started pretty late in life. I was 27 years old, and I'd heard that you reach your physical peak at 27. I didn't feel like I was at the peak of much. And a friend of mine just happened to be training for his first marathon, just as like a bucket list thing. And I thought, well, if he can do it, maybe I can. And he ended up actually getting injured. And so he had this book, I think it was a Hal Higdon book on how to train for your first marathon. He gave it to me, and I used that. And I did a couple of half marathons and then ran my first marathon. And I ended up doing a few seasons of that until I was about 30 years old. And like you, I heard about these 100-mile races, or I heard about ultramarathons, 50-kilometer races and longer. And I thought, this is crazy. I thought 42 kilometers was long. And then I started hearing about even longer races, 100-mile races in the mountains, and it completely blew my mind. And at the same time, I also started experimenting with trail running. Growing up in Vancouver, right near the mountains, we have beautiful technical trails right there in our backyard, and I instantly got hooked. So at about 30 years old, I switched over to trail, started training for my first 50K, 50 mile, 100K, 100 mile. The rest is history. It took a couple of seasons to build up, but you fall in with the wrong crowd, or I guess the right crowd, depending on how you look at it, and you realize that 100 miles is not that far. And I also have learned along the way to never say never, because it's just a matter of time. And like I said, you meet the right group of people, and they inspire you, and they guide you along the way. They mentor you into those bigger goals as well.
So after starting with more typical road running like most people do, what was it about when you first found trail running? What was it about that really got you hooked and fall in love with the sport?
Yeah, I mean, it was something very specific, which is, I was getting diminishing returns with my road running. I'm not a natural athlete. I have to really think through things. Again, I started running quite late in life, and I wasn't an athlete growing up. And so I did see some immediate gains with those first couple of marathons. But by my third marathon, I was realizing, I'm at a point now where I'm probably going to be training for 6 months, working my butt off, following this very structured training plan. And then on the day, I need to execute perfectly. I can't take an unexpected bathroom break or anything, maybe to gain 4 minutes on my PB. And that's if everything goes perfectly. Whereas with trail running, it's completely different. Every course is different. Every day is different on that course. You have different weather. You have, different conditions, different fields. It's less about time, and it's more about and you don't tend to compare races as much and compare times as much. It's much more liberating, and it's a much more kind of just playful experience. And I think that's what drew me to trail running right away. And it's not to say that there isn't something nice about road running in how measured it is. You can look at pace. I mean, we don't think about pace at all on the trails. It's about effort, perceived effort. There's so many metrics we just don't worry about when we're trail running. And again, it's liberating.
Yeah, for sure. And I can relate a lot to that, but I also like the mix, like doing some road races where you, as you say, you get to see your exact pace and you can compare your times. Do you ever miss that and want to like mix in that, or are you satisfied with just staying on this really long ultras on the trail now?
No, I do. And I actually advocate for that trail runners should go back and do road races and say in their off season, like in the winter. I haven't done it the last few seasons, but there were a few years where I did it. And I know I should go back to doing, say, a 10K or a half marathon in the winter because, first of all, it's a great way to work on your speed because we do tend to become kind of shufflers in the ultra running side of things. And so it's a great way to work on your speed again. But it's also a great way to learn, because it is important to learn how to run at a certain pace and to get that turnover back, because those are the skills that help you later in these races. And often in an ultra marathon, you might finish on 5 miles or 10 kilometers of pavement at the end, running to the finish. So if you have that finishing kick, and if you understand what it means to run a certain pace, that can really help you in these races as well. So I actually think you're right. It's about that balance, and going back to the road to sort of tune yourself up again can really help. And something I now take for granted is that I did have a few seasons of very structured road running as a background. So I understand speed work, training on the track, and we still do that work now. We do a lot of work on the track. We do a lot of hill repeats and things as well, and some on the treadmill. And sometimes I will go out and do a tempo run on the road. So having that background of more structured training, I think also has served me very well as a trail runner. So I definitely would encourage trail runners to, if they haven't ever done any structured sort of road running, to maybe take on that challenge of try to run a fast half marathon, because you'll learn so many skills that are transferable back over, as well as that fitness and that cadence and all those other things as well will transfer back to your trail running.
Let's walk back a bit to your journey into running. When you started running these longer races, you said you started with like 50K, 50 miles and only ran longer and longer. Do you remember a specific moment when you realized, okay, I can go beyond 100 miles and run even further than that?
I don't think it was a realization. It was always a question of could I? And so, I did a few 50Ks before I was ready to take on the 50 mile. I think I did one of those before I took on the 100K. And then I felt like I was finally ready after a couple of seasons of building up to try myself at the 100 mile. I did quite a few of those, I think about a half dozen, before I eventually moved on to even longer distances, running my first 200 plus mile race, the 205 mile Tour des Géants, 330 kilometers in the Italian Alps. And going into that race, it was a question of, can I run this distance? And I could, it turns out. A lot of power hiking as well, I should clarify. It's a lot of hiking. It's just a lot of time on feet. And that's where it becomes so mental. We talk about the mental aspect of running, and that's increasingly so at these longer distances. Then the next year I went a little bit further and ran the Swiss Peaks 360K. A couple years after that, I ran the Moab 240 mile race as well, so pushing 400 kilometers. And so I'm still looking for that upper limit. So it's not a matter of knowing I can run further. It's just this question that remains of how far can I run? And I still actually don't know the answer to that, which is exciting. And I think it makes us realize, I mean, I'm not a natural athlete. I'm not special in any way. That we can accomplish a lot more than we think we can.
So if I'm understanding right, it's sort of like the curiosity and the challenge of knowing you don't know if you will even be able to finish this that draws you to pushing even further and further.
That's exactly it. And with the marathon, going back by comparison, I do know there's a limit to how fast I can run a marathon. There's genetic limits. I'm getting older. I'm not getting faster on the roads necessarily. So there would be a limit. And at that point, I'm only going to get slower. With ultra distance, I may be getting slower as well, but I can always go longer. And that's where I think that curiosity can remain, that you can lose. And you can lose the passion for road running, I think, as you start to slow down. And that's where I think we do see runners shifting into ultra distance and running longer, where at the top end of the sport, sometimes age isn't a barrier. We're seeing people in their early 50s winning races, like the Hard Rock 100, and like some of these 200 plus mile races. And it's because experience, strategy, patience comes into play at that point, not just pure physical fitness. So I think that you can also have a lot more longevity, I think, in a sport like ultra running, which is counterintuitive because you think it's harder on the body. But in some ways, I would argue it's not. In some ways, it's easier on the body potentially, depending on how you approach it. But it also can just be, again, it can leave more on the table for you to want to chase.
There's always a longer race.
That's right. There's
there,
always
I
a
guess.
longer race. Yeah.
Yeah, but you say that you're not a natural gifted or a talented runner, but I'm thinking as a physio myself, and so I'm thinking that there must be some sort of talent for you to be able to even handle those extreme long races. And did you sometimes somewhere along your journey into running and ultra running realize that okay, I'm pretty good at this long stuff?
I would define it as luck, or yeah, luck of the draw. I have three things going for me. And the first is I am an efficient runner. So I'm not a very fast runner, but I'm an efficient runner. I have a sort of mid to 4 foot strike. I'm a very light runner. And so I do get overuse injuries, but I'm efficient when it comes to energy use. And I think I did develop that in my road running because, as I said, I'm not a natural athlete, which forced me to really analyze how to become a runner late in life. And I had been dealing with some initial injuries. I had runner's knee. I had shin splints. I had these things where I had to work with different physios and learn about running form and go from a heel strike to a midfoot strike. And I had to really think my way into the sport. And that has helped me long term and really analyze my running form. And that, while again, I'm not a very fast runner at the shorter distances, efficiency really matters at the longer distances, I believe. And the second piece is I'm really lucky with my nutrition. I have a very solid stomach, so I can eat mostly anything, and I can eat quite a bit of it. I'm a good eater, and we often like to joke that ultra running is an eating contest. Now, you can't eat your way to a win, but you certainly can starve your way to a loss, to a DNF. So you do need to eat and drink, and I just happen to have a very good stomach. So again, that's luck, I suppose. You can train your stomach, and for higher carb, you have to train your stomach to be able to drink, to take in a lot of fluids, and I actually do that as well. I do practice my eating and my drinking and my training. I think that is important. But again, a bit of luck there. And then the third thing is I think I have good feet. I just don't get blisters, which some people just have their feet. Maybe it's their skin. I'm not sure what it is, but some people just deal with blisters that, it's not their legs, it's not their mind, it's their feet that give up. And so I'm just lucky. I just tend not to get blisters. Although I would say that that's partly in shoe selection. I think choosing the right shoes based on fit, just really making sure you're not going to have foot problems, not getting hung up on features and what the shoe reviewers are saying, but really just finding shoes that fit you well, putting them through the paces, make sure they're going to work for you on race day. That is something that anybody can do.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And you're for sure having some great talents for ultra running there, because as I see it, like maybe one of the two biggest limiting factor for most people running this really long distances is, as you say, nutrition, being able to handle taking in a lot of carbs through many hours while running, and as you say, also with like the feet and blisters. And I've also have a quite good stomach and been able to eat and drink a lot through my ultras, but my limiting factor has for sure been the feet. Like I always, often on new places, but when I run 10 hour plus, the blisters become so bad, and that's a hard pain to go through compared to a lot of other, like it's easier to deal with getting tired legs and a bit stiff here and there, but that when you have like blisters chafing every single step and blood in your socks, that's not fun. So you have two good talents there for sure. And you say as well, it's also about being strategic and training on the nutrition bit and finding the shoes that work for you, and so.
And I think taking care of your feet as well. I published a film about my race at the Moab 240, where I knew going into it, we're going to be dealing with a lot of sand, really fine sand that gets inside of your shoes. And so while I do have good feet, as I said, there's a limit. And so we went into that with a strategy of doing these foot baths every 50 miles or so. So I'd wash my feet off, re-lube my toes, put fresh socks on. And I did that, I think, 3 times during the race. You would see that in the film I made. And so I was spending time, a few minutes, but still it adds up. But I saw that as an investment in time, because spending 10 minutes over the course of a race taking care of your feet could save you an hour, or even potentially save you from having to drop from a race, dealing with blisters later on. So I do think, again, there's ways we can think our way through all this. And especially with ultra running, it's a lot of problem solving. And because you don't know what problems, you don't know what kind of weather you're going to have on the day, you don't know what kind of issues you're going to have to deal with. What you want to do is set yourself up for success by giving yourself all the tools you can That's knowledge, learning how to take care of your feet, whatever it is. It's having the right equipment, the right gear. You don't need to spend a lot of money on gear, but you do need to have the right tools. You need to have warm clothing, have waterproof stuff. I mean, these are all things you learn from experience. And then training and practicing with all those things as well, knowing how to use things and just experience, having gone through all this before. You can learn a lot of this by helping others too, by crewing, by pacing, by seeing how they deal with these issues. Just through osmosis, you gain a lot of this knowledge. And so there are so many variables on the day, but again, it's about giving yourself the tools you're going to need to work through those problems.
Yeah, I for sure have a lot to learn from you when it comes to taking care of my feet. And so probably, if I'm going to run one of these longer races again, which I probably will do, yeah, I will take that advice and really invest the time, as you say, on taking care of the feet along the way to avoid those problems later on, because it's not fun to, to have that kind of pain. And I find it really interesting how, when you talk about this, about ultra running being about problem solving and how strategical you talk about this. And when I talk to other successful ultra marathon runners, they seem to have this really like logical and strategical mind, where they have a great plan, and they are also, of course, ready to adjust on their feet, but they try to find all of those things that could slow them down later on the race. Are you like, in general, a really like strategical and logical person in all aspects, or?
I am. I'm a very analytical person, and I think there's other ways to approach the sport. I know some people who are, I mean, again, going back to the Moab 240, where you'll notice in my film that Jesse Haynes, who won the race, he kind of showed up last minute, didn't have his drop bags ready, was very scattered, didn't have a crew. That's a different approach. And some people sort of run more based on, I suppose, heart, and passion and maybe experience as well. I think the more you've done this, the longer you've done this for, the more you can get away with doing that kind of thing, maybe. But I've always tended to approach it much more analytically. It's just the way that I am. It just, I have spreadsheets for timing and things like that. So yeah, I think there's different ways to approach the sport, but I definitely am more analytical. I think in everything I do in life, and one of the things I say is, I think how you do anything is how you do everything. And so how I approach the sport is the same way I approach a lot of things like my work, for example.
Yeah, that's really cool to hear. And as you say, in ultra running, there is really place for all different kinds of people, and people can perform at really high level with different approaches, for sure.
For sure, yeah.
And as a coach and physio myself, I'm really curious to hear more about your training and what it takes to prepare for like a 200-mile plus event, because I'm guessing it's quite different from training to run these shorter ultra distances. Can you walk us through your like general training philosophy when it comes to preparing for these brutally long races?
Well, generally I focus on time on feet. So I do all my training and have since I started running, actually based on time, not on distance so much. And that frees you up when you're on the trails to focus more on, well, in my case, to do adventures in the mountains, where I just need to get out and have a long day. I don't need to think so much about pace and, exactly stats. I will try to simulate a race course condition though. So if it's a very hilly race, I'll try to go train in the mountains on hillier terrain. If it's a more runnable race, I will try to find terrain that's more runnable. But typically I'm focusing more on time, and I try to sort of trick myself into training. So I'll adventure my way through my training. I'll do fast packing adventures. So for example, if I'm going to do a 100+ mile week of training, it's not because I'm out doing big tempo runs and doubles. It's because I'm fast packing in the Alps. We're doing the Tour de Mont Blanc next week, for example. And here I am in my last block of training for the Mammoth 200. So that's a great way to trick myself into getting a 100-mile training weekend without it feeling like work. It's going to feel like play and an adventure.
You mentioned earlier that you also do like some speed work, but do you do that on a regular basis each week? Do some intros as well, or is it mainly about getting as much volume and time as possible on your feet?
So speed work, it depends on what I'm training for. For example, for the Badwater 135 recently that I ran this year, and so I was training for that throughout the year. We did a lot more. It was a very runnable race. It's on the road for 135 miles through Death Valley. We did a lot more speed, trying to keep that turnover up. I was doing a lot of work at the track, and I typically will do that more in the off season. I find it hard to, I guess as a general philosophy, I try to avoid doing speed and volume at the same time, because as I'm increasing my volume, I find that's when I can get injured doing a lot of speed work. So I try to do speed more in the off season, come into a season with a foundation of speed, and then layer volume over top of that, which I believe is actually the opposite of what they do in road running. Usually I think you build your volume and then you layer speed, but this has just always been what works for me. And then any speed work I do later in my season becomes more about maintenance and just trying to keep a little bit of turnover, as we'd say, because you do end up being a little bit more of a shuffler sometimes. Training for these longer distances. So you want to keep that turnover. You want to keep that top end up if you can, so maintain that. But also, again, you want that turnover for the end of the race. If you get into you want to leave it all out there and have a 10-kilometer sprint at the end. You want to have that turnover in your legs. So that's all to say. I think it depends a little bit on what I'm training for. I recently started training again with a coach. I went a couple seasons without one. My girlfriend Audrey is actually my coach. And she's been good at getting my butt back in gear and forcing me to do some speed work. So that's one of those things I know I should be doing more of, but sometimes I let it slide a little bit more than I should.
Yeah, but your strategy of not increasing the volume and more speed work at the same time, I think is really smart and something everyone can learn from. As a physiotherapist, when I used to work at a clinic, a lot of runners who came and was injured was because they did try to do those two things at the same time. They started running more and started running faster. I think you have to take one at a time, and as you do it, I think it sounds really smart to first build up the volume and focus on that. And of course, when I even though the speed work is important, I'm guessing like the most important thing is to have ligaments and muscles and bones that survive the distance, and then, as you say, like those high volume with time on feet will be really important.
Yeah, and I think also thinking long term. So what we're talking about here with maybe doing speed then volume. We're talking about macro periodization, of course. So structuring your season in a way where it has ebbs and flows in different periods. But I think we can look at macro periodization over longer timelines as well, over multiple seasons. Kilian Jornet, in his contribution in Training for the Uphill Athlete, which is a really great book on training, he actually mentions this, and it's one of these things that's so obvious when you hear it, but we often don't think about it. He talks about the 10% rule that we hear so much about, where you shouldn't increase your volume more than roughly 10% each week. But you can look at that monthly as well, but you can also look at that annually. So if your goal is to run a 200-mile race 5 years from now or 10 years from now, you can work backwards and look at what the volume increases will need to be season over season. And you might realize that might be too aggressive. Maybe you can't do it in 2 or 3 years. It kind of depends where you're starting from. So I would encourage people to think long-term with their running. And if your goal is to run a 200-mile race, maybe think about how many years will it take you to go from what you're running now. Maybe it's 1,000 kilometers. Maybe you need to be training 3,000 kilometers a year. How long will it take you to safely build up to that? Season over season, not just week over week. Because things like you mentioned, your ligaments and all those, soft tissue, you can probably speak to this better than I can, but those take years to develop. And in fact, I've heard it takes up to a decade for your body to adapt to, going from couch to marathoner or ultramarathoner. It takes about a decade for your body to adapt to those kind of pressures.
Yeah, you're for sure right. It takes time, and that's the main issue, that when people get injured is that they have a bit too little time, and I've done this mistake hundreds of times myself, that you rush into it, but your body can handle. You're an example of that your body, the human body is able to handle pretty extreme things if you just take it cautious and gradually increase over time. And another really interesting aspect of these extremely long races that you're running is sleep. Because myself, the longest racing time I've had is, I think, 21 or 22 hours, and then sleep isn't a big problem because, of course, you can be awake for a full day without big problems. But when you're running like 70-hour plus races, I'm guessing that sleep becomes a massive factor. How do you deal with that? Like, is it something you train on to be able to go for that long without a lot of sleep?
Yeah, and I mentioned, some of the superpowers I have, like my stomach and my feet tend to be pretty good. Dealing with lack of sleep is not one of my superpowers. And there's some runners I've seen that are so good at going 80, 90, 100 hours without sleep. I need to sleep, and so I will have a plan going into these races, and I'll try to stay on that plan. But I always plan to sleep. You can have a plan not to sleep, but I wouldn't advise that for your first multi-day race. But it's not something you can train your body for. And in fact, it can be detrimental, because in your training, you really want to be getting rest. That's so important for recovery and for injury prevention, and for your body to adapt to the stimulus that you're giving it. So the short answer is no, absolutely not. You cannot train for sleep deprivation. And I believe all the science points to that as well. But again, you can go into it with strategies, and you could test it. You could see how you respond to sleep deprivation, but you don't really know until you try it. So I think going in with a bit of a plan, for me, that typically looks like I don't try to sleep before about 32 to 34 hours on feet. Because I've tried after about 24 hours, and I lay down and I can't fall asleep. Maybe I'm over-caffeinated, I'm too excited, and that's a waste of time. So for me, around 34 hours is the sweet spot. If I try to wait too long, 40, 42, 44 hours, I find I dig myself into a hole, and then I have to sleep for that much longer to try to work out of it. So I usually plan a break, maybe 45-minute nap after about 34 hours, and then maybe about every 24 hours after that, every 20 hours or so, I'll do another 45 minutes to an hour. So during the Moab 240, I was out there for just under 71 hours, and I believe I slept 2 hours and 45 minutes over that time period, in 3 increments, basically.
Yeah, that's just fascinating to hear about. Like, yeah, and like for a race like that Moab, when you sleep for so little and run for so long, I'm wondering how does it feel afterwards? Like both like the sleep deprivation and the massive impact you had on your body throughout the whole race. What is the feeling when you finish that race?
It's not too different than a 100-mile race recovery, although I will say that the longer the distance, I find the less strain it puts on your body. What I mean by that is if you race a 50-kilometer race really hard, if you're a well-trained athlete, you go and you run that your hardest, you're going to be very sore and tight, and might have a hard time walking the next day. Whereas sometimes after a 100-mile race, you actually feel better than you do, because you're doing a lot of hiking. And that includes a 200-mile race. You're doing a lot of hiking often, but your body's also recovering as you go. You know, if you're out there for 3, 4, or 5 days, some of these races, your body is recovering as you go, which we can speak to nutrition. It's important to be getting protein as well to allow your body to recover as you go. So it's not like running 200 miles. It's not like you feel double as bad as 100 miles. In fact, sometimes your legs feel almost better, because again, you have been sort of recovering as you go. But where it really hits you is just this fatigue. There's these things that are happening to your body that I don't even understand completely, that your hormones, your immune system is completely shot. It's so easy to get it. You almost always get a cold after a race like this. Your body does kind of shut down in other ways. People tend to get a lot of water retention, and that's often because of a lack of protein, I think. A lot of sodium and a lack of protein. So again, you can mitigate that through proper nutrition. And so you might have my first 200-mile race. For days after, I had night sweats. I was just sweating all night. It was disgusting. And swelling my lower legs. I was skinny up top, and I was like the Michelin man on the bottom. And that was just like water retention that was running down to my feet. So your body, it goes through quite a bit, and for me, that's why I would never do more than one of these races in a season. It's so hard on your body. The last piece being the sleep as well. Missing sleep is very hard on your brain, and I think that's, again, in ways that we maybe don't quite totally understand. It's very hard to study sleep deprivation, and especially in athletes. So I think that, you know, some athletes do 3, 4 200-milers in a year. And to me, that just feels like it would be too much for me anyway. I know that. I don't want to pass judgment on their choices. But it's the things you wouldn't consider after a 200-mile race that really get you. It's just this deep fatigue that stays with you for weeks. You'll go and start running and go, my legs feel great. And then 30 minutes in, your body just goes, no, stop. I'm tired. I'm exhausted. Turn around. Let's walk home. So it affects you in different ways. Yeah.
Yeah. Are you at any times worried that you will like cause yourself some like long-term health risk with and damages with these extreme races?
I would say yes, but only the sleep deprivation. I'm quite confident that this type of run-in, if you've properly prepared your body, and if you're pacing yourself, you're not pushing yourself through injury. We need to understand the difference between hurt and harm. Hurt can be okay, things can hurt, but you should never be harming your body, pushing through an injury. It is, I think, only the sleep deprivation that's really potentially, and again, I'm not sure we totally understand it, potentially having long-term negative effects. And that's where, for a lot of runners approaching these races, there is time to sleep a lot more. So if you look at a race like Moab, or when I did Tour des Gens, I think I finished in about 107 hours. Well, I had 150 hours to finish that race. I could have slept for 40 hours and still finished. So you can be taking much longer naps, which is a much healthier approach. So I would say for anybody considering doing one of these, going into it planning on sleeping a lot more is a much healthier approach. You'll enjoy it a lot more. You'll be in a better mood, all those things, and I think will cause less damage. Unfortunately, if you want to be competitive, it's about sleeping as little as possible.
I would like to try running further than I've done, but what I'm like most afraid of is that like sleep deprivation. Yeah. I'm not that sure that I want to like compete in sleeping as little as possible. Although it's like fascinating to see what you and others can do. It's I think it's like I can only imagine how it is, but it must be a completely different type of suffering when you're that tired, have that much pain, and haven't slept for days. Have you heard many people saying that they start experiencing hallucination, and so when they come into day 2 and day 3, is it something you experienced as well?
Always. I always get hallucinations. It's quite often auditory hallucinations. You hear voices, maybe it's birds, but you think they're voices in the bushes. You see a lot of things as well, so visual hallucinations. You'll see a big rock and you'll say, is that a car? Why is there a car in the bush? Or it's quite common to see aid stations everywhere. You know, you think you see an aid station up the hill, and of course you're miles away from the aid station. I see, often my vision just kind of goes blurry a little bit. I'll see little swirls and patterns in the ground. So that's very common, little kind of happy faces. Everything looks like shapes. But in the moment, it's not like it's not a scary type of hallucination. It's sort of something you're well aware in the moment that you're hallucinating and that you're hearing things and saying things. And it can be quite entertaining, actually. But yeah, that's pretty much guaranteed in these multi-day races. And it's the sleep deprivation again. That's the whole reason for it.
Yeah. But you never had a scary experience from it. You always are aware that that this is not real. I'm just hearing and seeing.
Yeah, it's not like an acid trip or something where you don't know what's real, what's not. No. Again, I think it's just there's things where you kind of see what you want to see quite often. It is often seeing aid stations, thinking you hear. I often will see. I remember the last race I was doing. I had my friend Derek Lytle filming for me, and I kept thinking I saw him, or that I saw his drone. I kept thinking that he had drones ahead above me. And the last night, I remember there were these lights, and they might have been shooting stars or just stars, or satellites probably. And I remember thinking that he had like 18 drones up in the air. And in the moment, I'm like, wow, I didn't know he owned so many drones. Where I think I'd see him in the bush filming me and be like, is that Derek over there? So sometimes you just see what you want to see. I don't think it's a dangerous thing. I don't think anybody would ever walk off a cliff because they're hallucinating or something. I've never heard of that. It tends to be something that we as runners kind of laugh about. And, you share war stories about what you're seeing out there in the bush.
Clearly, you push yourself to a really special place in the mind when you start hallucinating and are out there on the trail for this long. Have you ever had some sort of realization or got into a deep state in your mind where you have learned something about yourself or the world or how you want to live your life that you have taken with you after a race?
I think so. And honestly, sometimes that just happens on a long training run. You get the endorphins flowing and, your body, it rewards you for doing this type of exercise. Evolutionarily, we chased animals down in the Serengeti, and We would, persistent hunt for multiple days, a lot of walking and then running. And so your body has built-in reward mechanisms to help encourage this type of behavior, right? So yeah, I think sometimes you can really think your way through problems, come up with solutions. I tend to take notes. I come up with ideas for videos and stuff and films, and I'll sometimes write those down or do voice recording as I'm running, just during training runs as well.
Yeah, we mentioned it a bit, like the nutrition part of it, that it's
Yeah.
such a big part of it. And I've seen, like, in the recent years in cycling and in ultra running, there seems to have been like this revolution where people are pushing the limits of how much carbs you can intake each hour, and it seems to have really lifted the performances in these longer endurance events. Can you talk a bit about your nutrition strategy for extreme races like this?
Yeah, so as I said earlier, like I think it's really about how much you can eat, because nutrition can be a limiting factor. Just calories, getting calories in can be a real limiter for people. I typically don't have that problem, although I do tend to think about the type of calories I'm getting in. I do try to get in protein in these multi-day races. Because as I said as well, this helps you with your recovery. I think you're really thinking about, when you're out there for 24 hours or less, you can do it basically on carbs. But as soon as you're out there for 2, 3, 4 days, you need to be taking in similar nutrition to what you'd be taking in your day-to-day. You need to be, I pop multivitamins. I'm taking, the things I would normally do in day-to-day life. So, and that, again, can really help your recovery, but it can also help your performance. Having said all that, for a lot of people, it's just about whatever you can get down. Sometimes if you need to be just drinking soup for 2 days, then that's what you're going to do. If you're just eating sugary food, then that's what you have to do. Drinking pop. I mean, we unfortunately often need to throw health out the window when it comes to the types of food we're eating just to get calories in. I think it's a luxury to be able to choose the foods you're eating, which some of us can do. But for a lot of people, it's just about getting food in, any kind of food, any kind of calories. And then sort of that next level is what kind of calories, what your mix of macros are. But we can train for this as well. So especially with the high carb revolution, a big part of this is training yourself for taking in more carbs, being able to oxidize more carbohydrates. You need to also be taking in more water to balance those out. And you have to train your body to be able to take in that water. I found my limit for carbohydrate intake is about 80 to 90 grams per hour. And I find that my GI works better with a mix of carbs and protein, if I can get in some protein as well as a secondary energy source. Yeah, I mean, with the ultras, it's one of the best parts is the aid stations are so well stocked. It becomes a smorgasbord of food, especially the North American ultras in the US and in Canada. The aid stations are quite well stocked. I mean, you have everything from fajitas and burritos, breakfast burritos, to burgers and chips and candy. I mean, whatever you want. In Europe, it's a little different. I found it's a little more limited, more like charcuterie and dark chocolate. Not a lot of sugary things, and often not as many options. So typically, people I know as well who come from North America will bring a lot of our own food with us, a lot of our own nutrition when we race in Europe. But in North America, it's a little bit easier to have options because, as I said, it's really about giving yourself the tools you need on the day. And a big part of that is that you don't know what kind of food is going to go down on the day. So you want to have as many options as possible. You want to have sugary foods, liquid nutrition like drink mixes, more, satiating foods. You want fats, you want protein. You want to have as much to choose from on the day because you never know how your body's going to feel, how your stomach's going to feel in different conditions, at different distances. What works for you after 4 hours may not work for you after 40 hours. So you definitely need to have options.
Yeah, so we covered a bit about your training and the physiological aspects and the nutrition around the ultra running, but something I think is really interesting myself, and I think is such a big part of ultra running and ultra running performance is the mental aspect and the psychology behind it. And you talked about your different strength. I'm guessing that you must be pretty strong mentally as well to perform as well as you do in these races. Can you talk a bit about that aspect of running a race?
I suppose that's the case. Maybe that's something I take for granted. If you want to call it a skill, that maybe it's that psychological aspect. Maybe it's approaching the sport and the physical aspect of it rationally, looking at, how your body feels as just information. Pain is information. Discomfort, I should say, is information. You're checking in with your body. It's like driving a car. You have a dashboard. How are you doing on fuel? What are your RPMs? What's the temperature of the engine? I mean, you have different gears. So you're driving this vehicle that is your body. And I think if you can look at it that way and look at these different data points as just what they are, they're information that you can then affect through pace, nutrition, hydration, being able to sort of step back a little bit outside of your body, I think is something that we should all aspire to try to do. It's not always that easy in the moment. I really do like, though, to approach the sport, again, very cerebrally, really rationally. So when when I trained for the Badwater 135 here, it was a lot of heat training, and it's trying to use all the science on heat training that we have. And then on the day, it was about heat management. So using ice, using water, hydration, we were measuring everything, the electrolytes, water intake. I was doing regular weigh-ins. I mean, these are all things that, were just basically helping me to, again, treat my body like an F1 vehicle, and my crew is like my pit crew. And we're just trying to keep it moving, change the tires when we need to, put more fuel in the car. So that, I suppose that's the way that I approach the sport, which is less intuitive than some athletes, where they're just naturally athletic and they kind of just go out there and run with heart. And unfortunately, or maybe it's served me well, I approach it from this other angle.
Yeah. So you almost see yourself like a machine being out there, and then try to take care of that machine. But I'm guessing that also for you there must be moments in these races where you've been running for 30, 40, 50 hours, where you have this like emotionally low points. Does those happen, and how do you get through them? What keeps you going forwards? Because there must be several moments where you just want to quit.
Yeah, 100%. And it's often, a lot of people express the same feeling where they reach a point in the race that they question why they're running this race, but they also question, why are they running at all? What are we doing here? What is this silly hobby we've taken up? And I think that's a good sign. It means you're pushing yourself hard enough, that you're regretting your life choices. I think that's actually something that should happen at least once in every race. And I think that's where having a good why, a strong reason for doing what you're doing is important. Not just doing it because you think it's the next step. Oh, I've run 50 kilometers, I better run 100 miles. That's the wrong reason. So I think having a good reason for doing what you're doing. For me, it's a good reason for choosing the race that I chose. Something that inspires me about it, whether it's in a beautiful place, an inspiring history of the race. So each event there needs to be a strong reason for doing that particular event for me as well. And that can help me push through in that moment. For some people, it's fun. It's raising money for a charity. For other people, it's running for a family member or whatever it might be. But I really like to run courses that inspire me. So typically that's big point-to-point races across the Alps, or a big loop, around, again, the Aosta Valley and Tour des Géants, or the Moab 240. I typically wouldn't run like around a track. I've yet to do a backyard ultra. I might try that format one day where you're running just loops, every hour. But to me, that wouldn't be as inspiring, I don't think. And I worry that I might get to a point in the race where I decide not to keep going because I'm not there for the right reasons. So for me, it's about the place as much. That's why I love to travel for races. I love to explore the mountains and especially the Alps. So yeah, often it's the place that inspires me to keep going as well.
Yeah. So you're looking for like geographically interesting places where you like really want to complete that specific route. But can you elaborate a bit more about like you're saying that's important why? Is there something more than that keeps you going, like to not quit in those hard moments?
For me, there's not always that deep of a why. Again, it can be that I've chosen to take on a challenge and I want to finish it. I'm a very goal-oriented person. And so when I take on a goal, and that's why, again, it's more for me, it's less about the why in the moment. It's less about why I want to continue, and it's more about why I chose that goal in the first place. I need to have a clear reason for having chose that particular goal, that particular race. And there's some races that just call me more than others. And you know, the kind of event that you obsess over and you watch the films and you dream of. And then I know that choosing that goal, fixating on that goal for the right reasons, call it, will serve me well when I hit those hard times. Whereas again, choosing a goal, whether it be an event or a distance, just because you think you need to, because you think it's the next logical choice, or because everybody else is doing it, I think that's the wrong choice, the wrong reason to choose a goal. So yeah, I mean, often again, it can just be, what is that next distance and can I finish it? And I want to prove to myself that I can. I try not to let the fact that I'm filming a race put pressure on me, although admittedly it probably does. You know, the fact that I've committed to a goal publicly. I have sponsors behind me now for these projects, and an audience with expectations. I suppose that can serve as a motivator, you know, to keep me going. There's sort of a bit of, I mean, the audience isn't there with me, but I know that they will be there because there's a bit of accountability, I suppose. But I try not to think too much in that way, because I think that could lead to unhealthy choices in the moment. Again, I could push through an injury where that I wouldn't have otherwise, because I feel like I need to for the story, for example. So I try not to let that affect me. To what degree it does, I'm not sure. Maybe it does.
And that's really interesting. And I think you're touching on something that is a really strong why in itself, that to prove to yourself that you can go through those hard moments.
Mm-hmm.
And what I experienced myself from running just a few ultra marathons is that it really gives me a lot afterwards, that I knew how hard it was at that moment, and I knew
Mm-hmm.
that I managed to get through that, and that can really help you in your everyday life, I think, as well, in a great way.
Well, we call it type 2 fun as well, often, where type 1 fun is like, you know, downhill skiing or going on a roller coaster. It's fun in the moment. Type 2 fun is more fun upon reflection. It's what you take away from it. It's more rewarding type of fun. It's the types of stories you tell your friends at a dinner party. It's the, you know, it's the kind of thing that serve you later in life. You learn lessons from it. You just find it more rewarding long term. And I think ultra running is definitely that type. Although there is a lot of type 1 fun as well. And especially for me, again, I gain a lot of satisfaction from the places, the beauty of the places that we run in. But I think really more in the moment, it's often a little bit more about stoicism, getting through these events, and then I think it's that sort of like upon reflection that you really get a lot of the value from this sport.
Yeah, you mentioned a bit about you filming these races, and if someone watching this haven't yet checked out Jeff's channel, you should really do it, because it's a great channel where you document and create really ambitious and high production level documentaries about these races that you run, and I've enjoyed watching many of them myself. But when you started this whole running journey and started running longer distances and running ultramarathons, was it a plan from the beginning, you coming from a filmmaker background, to also create films around these events?
No, not at all. I mean, it was very organic. I've been a video producer in some capacity, a camera person, editor, run a video production company for over 20 years now. So I've been doing that pretty much my whole life, my whole working career. I'm 44 now, so I've been doing that since I graduated high school, really. So for over 20 years. And when I started running, which would have been now, whatever that was, 17 years ago, as a road runner initially, I did start to document some things, and it was more initially as a creative outlet, just filming some of my adventures. I made a series early on that I documented some other runners training for a marathon, for the Vancouver Marathon. But I didn't have a strategy or a plan to launch a YouTube channel by any means. I was publishing some content on YouTube, though, just as a place to share it with friends and family and maybe a wider audience. So it really wasn't until, I guess in 2018, I ran the Tour des Géants. That was my first 200 miler again, that I documented that. I thought, you know what, I'll make a little documentary about this race and see what happens. And I published that. I actually didn't publish that for almost 2 years, though. And at that point, I'd run my second 200 miler, the Swiss Peaks 360. I documented that as well. I had filmed a couple of other shorter races. And I started publishing all this around 2019, 2020. And during the pandemic, you know, my audience started to grow around some of this content, and I had some extra time on my hands and started leaning into that content. So that was really the year that I decided to go all in and to say, maybe I can make this, you know, something like a part-time job, or maybe even a long-term a business of some sort. So it was kind of organic until it wasn't, until it became a real decision. And it was initially really just a creative outlet, and now it's my primary actually business and primary source of income, and it's really become our lifestyle. I've stepped away from my agency business to really focus on YouTube full time.
That's really cool to hear that you can focus so much on creating these films that for sure inspire a lot of people out there, and also I'm guessing living your dream life, traveling the world and racing these epic races.
We really are. I mean, it's documenting this lifestyle that we have, and then that has afforded me the chance to do more of this lifestyle. We get invited to races. It affords us the travel, the time that's required to train. I mean, training is part of my job now. I'm not a professional athlete. I would say I'm a professional content creator first and foremost, but training and racing is part of my job, and doing adventures. And so, yeah, it really has afforded us this pretty incredible lifestyle. I do think long term though, around like, if I was to get injured or slow down in my running, I probably would lean more into telling other people's stories. So that's where, again, I see myself more as a storyteller first and foremost. I just happen right now to be focusing on telling my own stories as a runner while I can. And we'll see what happens longer term though.
And how do you balance filming? Because I'm guessing you're always filming when you're doing these races. And how do you balance that contra trying to, because you're also being really competitive in these races? Do you think the filming sometimes takes away from your ability to compete at a high level, or does it even give you something?
I think it does take away to a degree. It certainly slows me down a little bit. It is a distraction, filming my races. To what degree, I'm not sure. But there's also benefits as well. I mean, I've had moments in some of my longer, my multi-day 200+ mile races where I've come into an aid station just so tired and out of it, and there's carnage everywhere. And all of a sudden I take off my runner hat and I put on my director hat and I start running around, establishing shots and close-ups of other runners, and sort of seeing the scene, quite literally the scene like a movie set, from like 30,000 foot point of view. And so it can help kind of give me perspective and take me out of that discomfort that I'm feeling in the moment. But at the same time, then I'm wasting time doing that as opposed to focusing on my needs, hydration and nutrition and things like that. But at the end of the day, I wouldn't have the opportunities that I have without, if I wasn't making films. I wouldn't have the sponsors for sure. I mean, they're not sponsoring me because I'm on the podium all the time, because I'm not. They're sponsoring the films that I'm making ultimately, and the audience that is going to watch that. That's what they want. They want to get access to. It's not because, again, I'm getting earned media, as we'd say, like an elite would, who's on the podium all the time. And also we get invited to events and other opportunities that I just wouldn't have. So for me, it's definitely a net positive.
You mentioned it earlier a bit, this really epic race that you ran, Moab 240. I watched that film. It was a really great and captivating story, and seemed like a really cool race. And a 240-mile race in this really cool landscape. And you managed to finish second there. Can you tell a bit about what that experience was like, and has that triggered something like in you that, okay, I can actually win these big races?
Yeah, the Moab 240 is a relatively fast race compared to the other 200+ mile races I had done. I mentioned Tour des Géants and Swiss Peaks 360K. So while it was the longest race in terms of distance for me, I'd hoped it would be, and it turned out to be the shortest in terms of time. So 71 hours versus 107+ hours for these other races. And also I went into it with, that much more experience. And so I kind of wanted to apply everything I had learned around, pacing and nutrition and hydration, my sleep schedule, my sleep strategy, and really just kind of apply everything I had learned in previous races in all the 100-milers I'd run, and to see if we couldn't execute a little bit better on relatively home turf. It was in the United States, but of course, at least didn't require traveling over to Europe with the time change and all that kind of stuff. We had a vehicle this time, which normally we don't have when we run in Europe. So yeah, kind of went into that, just wanted to apply everything I had learned. And I have another 200-miler coming up now, the Mammoth 200, in less than 4 weeks now. So I'm over here in the Alps training for that. At UTMB, we're doing the Tour de Mont Blanc next week, and then I'll be heading to California to finish off my training and to race. And that's going to have a very deep and competitive field. So it's going to be a little bit different, but I'm going to do exactly what I did at Moab, which is just go in and just, run my own race and just be patient, and be, strategic, and, we'll see what happens. But after that, I'm not too sure. I think these 200 milers take a lot out of you. So we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, let's wrap things up, but it's been so cool to get an insight into these extremely long races, and maybe I will have to try some longer things myself. I think that I at least need to check that 100 miles, so maybe next year we'll see. But thanks for sharing all of your knowledge and experience in this really long ultra marathon races, and a huge luck in your final preparations towards that next race.
Thank you so much. It's been fun. Thanks.